Everybody was nice, and it moved real fast. I was able to show my ID, scan through the system. They called me and gave me my ballot, and I was able to vote.
Today's actually my first time voting, so just super excited to have my voice heard, and just a very great experience, first experience.
Millions of people across America show up to cast their ballots in big numbers, letting lawmakers know whether they're hired or fired. And in several states, voters have their say on statewide abortion policy.
For anyone that's discerning a vocation, it's just follow the Lord first, and the rest will just come into place.
To me, it's very hopeful seeing just how many women are interested in either learning more about it or really in pursuing it for themselves because they feel that call, that tug on their heart from the Lord.
It's National Vocations Awareness Week. We talk to those who have made a choice to devote their lives to the Lord.
It is more likely that a girl will die in childbirth than finish second-level education.
And we head to Africa, the Catholic mission trying to extend the promise of education to girls in South Sudan. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
There is one race in our state that is going to be moving to the December 6th runoff. That is the race for the United States Senate between Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker.
In limbo, the balance of power in the U.S. Senate remains uncertain when no candidate achieves 50% of the vote in Georgia. America appears split down the middle. As the final votes are counted from this week's midterm election, the House and Senate look almost evenly divided. While the Republicans in Washington might still take control of both the House and Senate, there was neither a red wave nor a blue wave. Mark Irons has our report.
We are exactly where we want to be in this race.
Some votes still being counted and races undecided in the midterm elections.
Every single vote matters.
But Americans have a better sense of what government will look like heading into the new year, divided. In Congress, Republicans appear on the brink of winning back a slim majority from Democrats in the House. The Senate remains closely split, with the majority currently undecided. And in the gubernatorial breakdown, it looks as though nearly half the 50 states will be run by Republican governors and half by Democrats. On Capitol Hill, Congressman Kevin McCarthy looked poised to replace Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House.
The American people are ready for a majority that will offer a new direction, that will put America back on track.
But polls suggest Democrats exceeded expectations in a number of midterm races, and President Joe Biden took note.
Democrats had a strong night, and we lost fewer seats in the House of Representatives than any Democratic president's first midterm election in the last 40 years.
The number of congressional seats flipped red for Republicans were fewer than expected.
While the press and the pundits are predicting a giant red wave, it didn't happen.
In some key Senate races, Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman beat Republican Dr. Mehmet Oz, while Republican Senator Ron Johnson won re-election in Wisconsin.
All eyes will be on Georgia to determine the final division of power in the Senate.
We're in a fight, are we not? We're in a fight.
Republican Herschel Walker and Democrat incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock both failed to get more than 50% of the votes in Georgia. So their Senate race goes to a runoff, meaning Georgians will go back to the polls December 6th and vote again for these top two candidates.
We will hear from the people of Georgia.
In close governor's races around the country, Democrats won in Wisconsin and Kansas, while vote counting continues in Arizona's gubernatorial race.
We need honest elections.
Republican Carrie Lake, a 2020 election denier and conspiracy theorist, was neck and neck with Arizona's Secretary of State, Democrat Katie Hobbs.
We know my opponent and her allies have been sowing doubt and confusion throughout this campaign.
Meanwhile, a big re-election victory for Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida.
We made promises to the people of Florida, and we have delivered on those promises.
What drove Americans across the country to vote in the midterm elections?
The economy is definitely a big one.
Reported exit poll data conducted by Edison Research showed inflation was the most important issue to voters, closely followed by abortion.
Women's rights.
Democrats not supportive of the reversal of Roe v. Wade this summer at the Supreme Court. With Republicans looking to gain power in at least one chamber of Congress, President Biden's legislative agenda could be stifled over the next 2 years. The Catholic commander-in-chief says he's willing to work with Republicans on some things, but he'll reject any federal ban on abortion.
I will veto any attempt to pass a national ban on abortion, but I'm ready to compromise with Republicans where it makes sense on many other issues.
Last month, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops called on President Biden to recognize the humanity in preborn children, protect life, and in a statement said the church wishes to continue working with government to ensure that pregnant and parenting mothers are fully supported in the care of their children before and after birth. Supporting mothers in need. As election season wraps up, Catholic bishops hope it's one priority that could bring a divided Congress together. Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
A stunning and disappointing night for the pro-life movement during this week's midterm elections as states put the abortion issue before voters in various statewide ballot initiatives and proposals. The state of Michigan's Proposition 3, California's Prop 1, and Vermont's Prop 5 all passed and will enshrine a right to abortion in various forms into their state constitutions. Michigan's Prop 3 removes parental consent, allowing minors to seek an abortion or even gender transition procedures. California's Prop 1 allows abortion up until the moment of birth. Montana's Referendum 131, which would have required care for babies born alive after attempted abortions, did not pass. And Kentucky's Amendment 2, which would have prohibited future language protecting abortion as a right, also failed to pass. These results didn't necessarily change laws in all of these states, as abortion was already legal in California and Vermont. In Montana, an existing abortion ban is blocked, so it is legal there as well. In Kentucky, the ballot results did not change the state law that bans abortion, a law that is already being challenged and is set to be heard in the Kentucky State Supreme Court soon. However, in Michigan, a 1931 ban on abortion was blocked. And now, with this ballot measure approved, abortion will be cemented into the state constitution there. This map shows states where abortion is currently legal at varying term limits in shades of green and banned or has term limits in red or shades of pink. The striped states reflect where abortion is legal right now as current pending lawsuits are underway. Again, once Michigan's constitution changes, it will be fully legal there. Joining us again now after the results are in, our EWTN News In-Depth reporter Teresa Tomeo, who has been following the Michigan race very closely, and Catherine Hadro, the Director of Media Relations for California's No on Prop 1 campaign and former host of Pro-Life Weekly. Both of you have been giving us great insight leading up to the midterms. Thank you so much for coming back to talk to us now that the results are in. Teresa, let's start with Michigan. You're joining us from a retreat in Italy. I guess you had to leave the country. You saw a lot of pro-life support to vote against Prop 3 in Michigan. Some of the unseen gatherings. You've never seen pro-life support like this. Many have said it's the most united Michigan pro-lifers have ever been. The results today after the election showed at least 57% in favor of Prop 3. How surprising was this loss?
I don't know if it was all that surprising, and thanks for the opportunity. And I am leading a retreat with my husband of about 40 pilgrims from across the country, many of whom are EWTN listeners and followers. I think what was surprising was the amount of people that came forward in terms of how we were outspent. We were outspent by 2 to 1. And there was something like $17 million, Montse, that was brought in from out of state, mainly from sources in New York and California. We know that Soros gave something like $4 million. Bloomberg also gave money. And then there are a number of other sources that brought in $17 million, for example, at one point, just 5 people donating on the left, Planned Parenthood supporters, to get this passed. I think we couldn't have done more, as I said when I was on with you recently. the Catholic community, the ecumenical community, the faith community in general, and even people who were pro-choice and against this matter came together and fought like heaven, actually, as we said in one of our prayer campaigns.
Yes.
But again, we were outspent. And the other important point that we have to remember, in 1998, and I covered this as a secular journalist, and we had an assisted suicide measure before us, the media were a lot more balanced. They certainly weren't unbiased, but they were more balanced. And so we had decent coverage. I wouldn't say great coverage, but decent coverage in terms of reporters that were willing to show us both sides of the story. That didn't happen this time for the most part. It was very biased reporting. It was misinformation. There were blatant lies that the media were letting the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and others get away with pertaining to this measure. So we were outdone in that area because we couldn't count on the media, the secular media, to be accurate. And then we were outdone with the ads in terms of the money. And so we were overspent 2-to-1. It was a tough road to hoe, but I'm telling you, I'm really proud of our community. I think we did a good job given the circumstances.
Well, you've got a lot of work to keep doing. The numbers in California, Catherine, were worse. Though the vote counting there continues, the latest totals show 65% in support of abortion. While abortion was already legal in California, Prop 1 basically expands rights to it. What paths are there then to protect life now?
Well, first off, I'll just say we are very disappointed with these results because we don't think this reflects the views of Californians. We know that more than 80% of Californians reject late-term abortion. And to be clear, that is precisely what Proposition 1 would allow. We've seen Proposition 1 politicians and, frankly, a lot of their allies in the media really mischaracterize what's at stake with this ballot, which is very unfortunate. So moving forward, what's next? The battle continues, and the battle now shifts to the courts and to the legislature. And I will say we also are so proud of the coalition we have built over these past few months, a coalition that is diverse, that is energized, that is organized, and determined to fight late-term abortion in the state of California. Prop 1 politicians assured voters it would not mean late-term abortion, so we're going to hold them accountable to that.
And Catherine, will there be challenges to free speech around abortion that are going to make that continued advocacy more difficult for you?
That's a really interesting question. Just a few days ago, the LA City Council said they're going to really target pro-life pregnancy care centers in California if they see any false advertising. Of course, we know it's the pro-life side that is the side of truth, right? It's the side of truth. So that is something that we're already seeing those conversations pop up in local city councils throughout the state of California. As you know, a few years ago, the Supreme Court sided with California pregnancy centers, saying they cannot be forced to advertise for abortion. But I think it's an interesting question because really it's a battle over words, isn't it? And it's a battle over euphemisms. And we saw the Prop 1 side really use euphemisms to confuse voters about what's at stake with this proposition.
That's right. Teresa, let's talk about this misinformation. What was it from the pro-abortion side messaging that really moved voters? We know that 1 in 4 women are probably post-abortive or related to an abortion.
Well, I think it was fear, and we all know in the secular media that there's a reason they have the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, because fear sells. Fear gets people's attention. We saw this throughout COVID, as a matter of fact. And so I think there was a lot of misinformation and blatant lies. The big one was, for example, that women who had miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies would not get medical service and medical help at local hospitals or emergency care centers if that were their situations or medical situations. So that was a complete lie. And they also actually said that parental consent, those parental rights would not be removed. And we know because of what the amendment said in terms of the amendment saying that any law that would prohibit the measure from going into effect would be wiped out. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But so they just basically turned everything upside down and literally lied repeatedly. And so they scared people. I mean, I had people, listeners of ours on Catholic Connection on EWTN Radio writing me and saying, is this true? No matter how many times we had pro-life OBGYNs on the air, they were preaching at the various parishes after the masses talking about this over and over and over again. We did a good job, I think, of reviewing the basics. But again, it wasn't enough to overcome the fear of what the left was saying would happen. So we had the ads, we had YouTube commercials, Facebook posts from the left. You had, what was it, millions of dollars that was poured in. Then you had the biased media repeating the lies that were in those ads. So it was a real tough situation for us. But again, I think it was fear. It was number one, it was fear. People were afraid of what would happen.
Well, we know people are scared, and Catherine in particular, women. What happens now for mothers with crisis pregnancies? Does the church need to step up its efforts? Will the state be stepping up its efforts?
The state has shown no interest in actually supporting mothers and families in need. Again, churches and pro-life pregnancy care centers are on the front lines of this battle, and I encourage everyone to support their local pregnancy centers. That's where the battle will continue.
Well, we're grateful that you all came and gave us this analysis, and we hope that you'll come back and tell us how things are going in post-Dobbs pro-abortion centers that you're in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As Catholics, we're called to educate ourselves about ballot measures and the policies and agendas that candidates support. But does our faith translate at the polls? We're joined now by Barbara Sella, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Catholic Conference, and Jennifer Allman, the Executive Director of the Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, to talk more about the outcome of the 2022 midterm elections and whether Catholic voters made an impact. Thank you both for joining us today. Barbara, fewer than 100,000 voters gave the Democrats a win for governor, and under 30,000 gave the Republicans a Senate win in Wisconsin. What was the impact of voting Catholics?
Well, the first thing I want to say is we had a very, very high turnout. And of course, there's no real way of knowing how Catholics voted. But what I can tell you is that Wisconsinites often will split their ballots. This was brought up recently by the former House Speaker, Paul Ryan, who is from Wisconsin. And he noted that when he would win re-election, very often, Democratic Senator Ross Feingold would also win his race. So this is typical of our electorates. In Wisconsin, Catholics are about a little less than 23% or around 23% of the voting population, and about 41% describe themselves as conservative, and another 42% as moderate. So there's a split there. But again, I want to stress that it is not uncommon for people to vote in both parties. And given that our Catholic social teaching cannot neatly be, fit into one political party or another, I would expect that many Catholics must have split their ballot.
That's very interesting to know that it's not unusual, but also that it allows people to be primarily Catholic and secondarily political, which is always a good thing. Jennifer, voters in Texas re-elected Republican Greg Abbott for governor, who has drawn a hard line on immigration, but rejected Mayra Flores, who drew similar lines. You've been on the forefront of the church's work with immigrants. Will the church's efforts change or remain the same?
Oh, our efforts will absolutely remain the same. We remain committed to Catholic teaching on migration, which is, of course, that people have a right to migrate, but that sovereign nations have a right to protect and secure their border. And so the bishops engage in a variety of ways. And I think you'll continue to see our ministries flourish and provide assistance as needed.
And have the elections in any way changed what you're able to do?
No.
That's good to hear. Barbara, Wisconsin is right, not far from Canada, a country that has passed a great many progressive policies, including legalizing abortion at all stages of pregnancy, and also legalizing assisted suicide and gender transition treatments for minors. Is that mindset bleeding down into Wisconsin?
I'm glad you asked that question, in part because I lived in Canada for 8 years. So I'm very interested in what is happening up there. I would say that there are, first of all, some of the things that you mentioned are happening globally, right? But I would say that the Canadian political system is quite different from ours. We have a much stronger system of checks and balances than Canadians do. We have stronger protections for free speech and religious freedom than Canadians do. So while it is very concerning what's happening in Canada, I really don't think that the advance and the extremism that is found there is likely to prevail in the United States. And then the other advantage that we have is that we can watch what's happening in Canada and learn from that. And adjust accordingly.
Is the diminished role of the church in Canada also, and the secularism there, also a factor?
Absolutely, yeah.
Jennifer, most of the votes in Texas were Republican, but there's a growing Democrat population, some easily attributed to moves during COVID lockdowns. How will that impact issues of importance to Catholics on the ballot?
You know, it's hard to say. There's a strong Republican majority in the Texas House and Senate, and of course, all the statewide offices are Republican. So, in all three in the House and Senate, they've increased the Republican margin. So, Democrats turning out in more numbers this session didn't really have an impact. For example, Governor Abbott won by 13 points or 11 points this time, and he won by 13 points last time. So it was only a 2 percentage point difference in Democrat turnout. That doesn't really translate to much of a difference in bills filed at the legislature. We do have a few unique bipartisan examples of legislation that we work on, and I am encouraged by some of the bipartisan conversations around the death penalty and around support for walking with moms in need. So I do think we're going to have some good conversations on those two topics in a very bipartisan manner,
which needs to be modeled for the rest of the country. Barbara, you talked about the voter turnout and increased voter turnout. What tools does the church have to educate voters and inspire them to go to the polls?
Yes, so every election, the Wisconsin bishops issue a joint letter to Wisconsin Catholics, urging them to become informed about Catholic social teaching and to take very seriously their responsibility to be faithful citizens and to take part in elections. They also stress, however, that the real work occurs after the election, right? Then the letter is accompanied by a brief summary of Catholic social teaching, materials that can be placed in church bulletins and in the diocesan papers. And then, of course, the bishops also usually write a column for their own diocesan papers. So there's a lot of work that goes on educating Catholics about what our church teaches and how it's all interconnected. And just to pick up on something Jennifer said, you know, we as Catholics are able to straddle both sides. We're able to be the bridge builders, and we are able to work on bipartisan legislation. So we are very excited here in Wisconsin that the new session coming up, it is divided government, but we're really hoping to bring both sides to the table and pass things in particular that will help women and children, following the lead of the U.S. bishops and their Walking with Moms in Need initiative.
Where Catholics are really going to need to take a leadership role. Jennifer, is anything different? Are there more resources, less resources to educate voters in Texas?
I don't know if I would characterize it about the resources for educating voters. I think there's a lot of engagement by the citizens and the public, and I think that's always positive.
And are the bishops doing anything in particular that's different?
I think they're continuing on the usual work and the usual issues. We're bringing back our large advocacy day. We do an advocacy day at the Capitol where about 5,000 Catholics come and speak to the full issues of the church. And we suspended it last session due to COVID. And so the bishops are really excited to bring their people back. So that'll be really fun this year.
Well, we'll look forward to that and also looking to see what else comes up in a post-COVID world. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's much more ahead on this edition of EWTN News In Depth. Next, we turn our attention to those Catholics discerning religious life. We'll be right back.
From the moment I walked in the door, I just loved the atmosphere. The sisters really felt like sisters to each other and sisters to me.
They do a great job here at Seminary also of implementing community time into everything that we do.
The call to serve the Lord. It's National Vocations Awareness Week. We'll take a deep dive into the numbers and what it takes to go through formation next.
Everything we do needs to have quality and needs to have an educational component.
And bettering the lives of schoolgirls in Africa. Our Colin Flynn travels to South Sudan and talks to some Catholic leaders determined to give girls a better life. We'll be back in a moment.
When I was face to face with the Lord, it was almost as if no one else was in the room. And I just had this experience that he was really, truly present and that he had a plan for my life.
I wouldn't be the man I am today if not for this place. The little scared kid who walked in his first year in formation, it's just really funny to look back and see how drastic the changes have been.
Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. This week, the Catholic Church in the United States celebrates National Vocation Awareness Week to promote vocations and encourage the faithful to pray for Catholics, both men and women, discerning religious life. An important call to action as the Church sees fewer and fewer men take the cloth and women join religious communities. According to studies conducted by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA, the number of priests overall fell from almost 60,000 in 1970 to about 35,000 in 2021. And the number of priests ordained has dropped since 1970 from 805 ordained in 1970 to only 441 ordained last year. This decrease can be felt in Catholic communities across the country. In 1970, 571 parishes did not have a resident priest, but now more than 3,000 parishes are left without a pastor. Last week, we discussed how seminaries are forming our future priests. We heard from two leaders who have helped hundreds of young men decide if the priesthood is the right path for them. They shared briefly what seminaries look for in potential priests.
One of our kind of one-liners here is just don't be weird. And if guys are weird, we got to talk about that. We don't need weird priests. And we've had too many. And there's weird in the sense of socially awkward, and then there's weird in the sense of like something's fundamentally wrong. And it'd be good to have neither, but definitely the latter. No way.
There's a growing trend of seminarians who are coming out of more intentional Christian communities, like whether it's homeschool, co-ops, or things of that nature, where they are being formed very well. But other seminarians who are not necessarily formed in that kind of environment, you see miraculous workings of God's grace, that even in the midst of such troubling circumstances, how God is forming and calling them.
To continue our conversation on seminary formation, we turn to Father Matthew Kauth. He's the rector of St. Joseph College Seminary in North Carolina. The seminary outside Charlotte is just 6 years old. Father Kauth, what was the inspiration in opening this new seminary on a college campus, and especially starting a seminary when vocations seem to be declining?
It's a good question. It was a foolhardy adventure, but it was marked with a number of different notes of providence, not least of which was I was returning back from Rome, having worked on a doctorate in moral theology and had some opportunities to teach offers to teach in seminaries at the time. And I wanted to come home. And when I came home, I began to teach at Belmont Abbey College, which is right here in our backyard as a diocese, an incredible resource. And so I began to talk with the president of the college about different ways we could collaborate with the college since I was teaching there. And eventually, from different sources, including my own considerations, this idea of having a local seminary began to sort of take shape in my mind. But at the same time, we had been working on kind of a culture of vocations for a long time in the diocese here, for about 10 to 15 solid years of really working on vocations, and we began to see some of the fruit of that. So in some ways, we wanted to not outsource our own fatherhood, but be able to take care of the men that were coming up through our parishes and those vocations that were growing and rising, take care of them here locally.
To care for them yourselves. And then what does that day-to-day life look like for your seminarians?
I think you might get a different answer if you ask them. It's highly regimented. I mean, the nature of formation is such that we consider the world to not be such a good formator. And so the first things that happen with men is almost a kind of detox, right? They detach themselves from social media, they detach themselves from a sort of worldly pursuit, and they have awful amounts of discipline in the beginning. At least what seems to them to be sort of almost constrictive discipline in terms of they get up exceptionally early. Most of them are in the chapel by about 5:30 or 5 o'clock. They have to be there by 6. And then our day is very ordered at this stage of formation in terms of college formation, because you're working principally on human formation at this point, the development of a character. So self-knowledge and self-mastery, especially over the passions and the various emotions in life, and trying to forming, as C.S. Lewis says, a strong chest. And so discipline is part of that. And so getting up early, being in chapel on time, spending vast amounts of time in both mental prayer and communal prayer. And then after that, the men would have in some ways a normal college sort of experience because they go to class. The difference is they come back here, they go over to the Abbey for class for the most part. Some classes we teach here in-house. And they come back here and we have formation classes, but also things like chant and music and liturgical instruction, etc. And then all sorts of sort of in-house talks that we do on various topics of discernment and formation, and of course more prayer time. But then at the end of the night, we basically go into grand silence, and from 8 o'clock until 8 in the morning. So every weekday we have 12 hours of silence to allow them to cultivate their interior life, not just for their studies, so they're not get distracted during study time, but also to develop that quiet and silence with our Lord, to be able to listen to him.
Grand silence. I love that. You just had your first class graduate. What kind of success then has your seminary seen so far?
Well, we began in 2016, and we're into our 7th year now. And the first year we opened, we didn't know if we would have anyone join because we didn't really have a college program per se. Before that, we had 1 or 2 college guys that were in the program, but we weren't sure what would happen ultimately if we started. And so we had one house that had 8 rooms available. It was an old convent, and 8 men joined. And so we were full. So the next year we bought another house that was contiguous, and we had 8 beds available and 8 men joined. That same thing happened every single year. Every year we have, no matter what the numbers seem to be in the beginning, you always end up with 8. And so we've had 50 men come through here in the last 7 years. So just from our diocese. So we've been very blessed with a fine group of men, and not just quantity, but quite serious men, and men that are lovers of our blessed Lord.
And that kind of formation stays with you forever, whether you continue or not. A recent study says that about half of priests ordained this year said that friends and family discouraged them from joining the priesthood. Why do you think this is the case, and what role does the family play then in vocations?
I think people are afraid. I mean, and to some degree, rightly so. They're concerned about the kind of life their son might live in a world that looks upon the priesthood with a fair amount of disdain and certainly an awful lot of suspicion. They probably have examples of priests who are living a communal life or a fraternal life, who are themselves lonely or becoming a bit, shall we say, skewed in their outlook because they don't have a normal prayerful communal life or a church that supports that life. One of the things we're trying to do here, because that's kind of the number one factor of priests either leaving or becoming dissatisfied, is trying to make sure we build very strong fraternal bonds among the men. And thank God, because of the numbers that we have, there's nowhere they're going to go in the diocese that they wouldn't have that brother right next to them, sort of at their side to make sure that they're being held accountable, but also just for the joy of doing the ministerial stuff together as the first apostles did.
Helping them stay together through building community. That same survey, though, says that many men think about the priesthood when they're as young as 16. How do you encourage young men, then, to consider the seminary, knowing that they're going to have these other challenges?
Right. So I think the most important thing is just the witness that they see amongst the men themselves. And so we have been fostering a retreat in the summer that's geared toward men of that age. And we have had consistently about 100 persons participate, 100 young men participate in that every single summer.
Wow.
But the most important thing is to have them have contact with our current seminarians. So imagine you have 100 young men that are encountering 50 seminarians of that same age group. So whether it's 18 up to 30, but relatively close in age, and to see these men not just be lovers of prayer and of the sacraments, but also they're just normal. and they're good. They're not off-putting. They're not awkward. They're athletic. They're whatever. I mean, the normal kind of men, and watching these men grow, not only in virtue, just for these younger men to see that this is possible, but to watch their joy. And joy is simply infectious.
Yes.
If they see a well-ordered man that's joyful, most young men will look at that and say, I don't know if I have a vocation, but I want what he has.
Yes.
So what does he have? And so that's part of I would say, the normal response that we get from young men, which isn't the same thing as a vocation, but it's a good start to get them to be open to the possibility.
And open to the possibility of having a long-term relationship with Jesus Christ, whether they become a priest or not.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Father Kauth.
You're welcome. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you.
I talk to multiple women every week who are really sincerely seeking God's will for their life, and they feel something.
Probably foremost in my mind is being able to celebrate sacraments, and but also just to witness the gospel to my own people.
We continue our look at the discernment to vocations. Next, a nun's life. The numbers are dwindling, but the commitment and enthusiasm are strong as ever. And a look at some little ones. Just 2 weeks ago, they came out in costume for All Saints' Day and All Hallows' Eve, a collection of photos from around the globe. Maybe they're the answer to the next generation of vocations. EWTN News In Depth is coming right back.
We've talked about a calling to the priesthood, but as we all know, the Catholic Church would not exist in such a personal way, touching the lives of so many people without the dedication and hard work of women religious. Numbers are declining, but there are hopeful signs, as reporter Roselle Regis explains.
I wanted to give my whole self to God, and I wanted other people to know that they were loved by God in the same way.
Sister Emily Beata is like many women religious who were drawn to religious life by a sense of call and a desire for a deeper relationship with God. Entering religious life at 20 years old, she is in a group of what's called millennial nuns, women aged 25 to 40 today that are part of religious orders in the U.S.
My name is Sister Bethany, and something that I love to do in our community and in life is both be on social media, but also I do a lot of music, and I love to sing, and I like to bake cookies a lot for the community.
Sister Bethany and Sister Emily are both part of the growing congregation, Daughters of St. Paul, also known as media nuns. From baking cookies and talking about the gospel of the day, to tongue-in-cheek memes, to answering questions about their habits, these media nuns post engaging content on social media.
Whether it's by our presence, be that physical or virtual, through a video, through a book project, whatever. But the goal always being that we want you to meet Jesus.
Even though there is a flourishing number of millennial nuns like Sister Bethany and Sister Emily, the numbers of those taking their vows is outpaced by aging members who are ending their service. According to Leadership Conference of Women Religious Figures in 2019, 80% of women religious in the U.S. are age 70 or older, and 45% are 80 or older. Overall, the number of nuns in the U.S. has plummeted from more than 180,000 in 1965 to about 39,452 in 2021, according to statistics from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown University. Because of the decline in the number of women religious, some convents are shuttering. Sister Deborah Borneman, the Director of Member Relations and Services for the National Religious Vocation Conference, said instead of focusing on the declining sisterhood, we as Catholics need to take a look at the church as a whole.
There has been a 68% decline in the number of sisters since 1980, 68%. And at the same time, there's been a 72% decline in the number of women and men getting married in the church. What's happening that we're not noticing together as church? How do we invite women and men to discernment, whether that's in marriage
whether that's in religious life, diocesan priesthood.
According to a special report from CARA from 2014, an investigation into religious institutes reveals that these sharp declines in membership occurred after an extraordinary period in the Catholic Church from 1962 to 1965. This period, known as the Second Vatican Council, began with Pope St. John XXIII calling for aggiornamento, or bringing up to date, of the Church. The number of sisters in the U.S. peaked in 1965 at 181,421 sisters. A sister who entered religious life at the age of 25 in 1965 would be 82 years old today. As stated in a research blog for CARA, we are unfortunately seeing the passing of this extraordinary generation of women. Borneman said newcomers are often inspired by the women who came before them.
Quite frankly, I'm not worried about the future because I see so many sisters who have lived this life faithfully over the past several years, and I point to them with excitement to say, I'd like to try to live my life like they have done.
The NRVC is an organization of vocation ministers consisting of 976 members from 286 religious institutes and dioceses. According to their data, most women entering religious orders are anywhere from 28 to 49 years of age and are already well educated. Based on an analysis of annual reports from CARA, from 2015 to 2018, an average of 211 women entered religious life each year in the U.S. Last year, 136 women entered religious life.
While there may not be an abundance of new vocations to religious life at this time, it is important to recognize that women continue to be called to this way of life.
It's a really exciting time in the church. I've been a vocation director since 2020, and I didn't quite realize how many are open to religious life, how many women that are in their teens, 20s are so open and actively seeking the Lord's will.
As a thriving community of more than 320 sisters in the U.S., the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia, also known as the Nashville Dominicans, serve around 40 schools in various states nationwide. Sister Mara Grace, who entered at 20 years old after attending 2 years of college, said community life and finding true peace are what attracted her most. She has no doubt other young women like her would continue to answer God's call.
Living in love with the Lord, that's the most effective way of getting young people to consider religious life as an option. The Lord is with you, that He is the one that calls. And so when we make ourselves present to Him, He takes care of it.
According to NRVC, entrants are significantly influenced by a sense of call and/or encouragement of family or a member of a religious institute. Based on their research, women and men are nearly twice as likely to consider a vocation when encouraged by another person. Interestingly, the internet is the third highest way an entrant first becomes acquainted with their religious institute. Sister Bethany, who has more than 23,000 followers on Instagram, receives direct messages all the time from young women who are interested in religious life.
I see people curious, and I see people searching, and they're searching for something, and they're searching for something greater. My Instagram DMs are a lot of young women being like, "Sister, how can I find out more?" Or, "I have a question," or "Can you pray for me? I'm trying to figure out what God wants with my life and what He wants me to do." God is still working in the midst of statistics, in the midst of all the things. God is still at work.
Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
Yeah.
If you are considering a vocation or want to help someone you know follow the call, the USCCB's website has a guide to the steps to pray and discern a walk with God. And it's never too early to discern religious life. In honor of Vocations Awareness Week, we share some little saints in the making as they show off their All Saints' Day costumes. These children are dressed as iconic priests and nuns from the church, from Therese of Lisieux to Francis of Assisi. A great reminder that all people are called to holiness, regardless of age or vocation. Thanks to our EWTN offices around the world and the EWTN social media team for sharing these photos with us. Next, Vocations in Action, a journey to Africa to visit a unique school made possible by the Sisters of Loreto. That, plus top headlines in the Week in Review. Alarming news for the Catholic Church in France tops the week in review. 11 bishops there are facing accusations of sexual violence, including the former Bishop of Bordeaux, Cardinal Jean-Pierre Ricard, who confessed to abusing a teenage girl decades ago. The president of the French Bishops' Conference read a statement from Ricard on Monday, which said, 35 years ago, when I was a priest, I behaved in a reprehensible way with a young girl aged 14. My behavior has inevitably caused serious and lasting consequences for this person. It was just 1 year ago when a landmark investigation into sexual abuse into the church in France revealed that an estimated 330,000 children had been molested by priests, monks, deacons, and Catholic laity. Those abuses happened between 1950 and 2020. Thousands of victims continue to deal with that trauma and are just now receiving financial compensation. Hundreds of alleged sexual abuse victims in upstate New York have agreed to a financial settlement with the Diocese of Rochester. The diocese will pay $55 million to a trust, as well as the rights to the diocese's insurance policies. Some 475 people filed claims of abuse. This allows the diocese to emerge from bankruptcy and give survivors a chance to press their claims against those insurers in court. The Diocese of Rochester includes 12 counties of upstate New York and serves nearly 350,000 Catholics. On Tuesday, Pope Francis accepted the resignation of a German bishop convicted of embezzling money from a woman suffering from dementia. Auxiliary Bishop Johannes Bungens was found guilty of transferring nearly $128,000 to his personal bank account after she gave him power of attorney. Bungens did repay the family, and he faces a 9-month suspended jail time and a €5,000 fine. The Pope expressed optimism about Christian-Muslim dialogue this week after his return from a 4-day trip in Bahrain. He said this and his other journeys to the Middle East should be seen as a bridge to create growing alliances. The pontiff made his remarks during this week's public audience held in St. Peter's Square. He also spoke extensively about conflicts around the world, including in Ukraine, Yemen, and Syria, saying the conflicts will never be resolved with weapons, but rather through the force of dialogue. The force of education and enlightenment. That is the message of a Catholic mission in Africa founded by the Sisters of Loreto, which focuses on the welfare of girls and their success. Colin Flynn traveled to South Sudan for EWTN News In Depth to bring us this story of hope.
I like the teaching, I like the environment, I like the way we are living in the compounds. We are so interactive.
Quality education is what we get here compared to other schools in the state. They put you in a comfortable environment just like you would be at home.
In the country of South Sudan in Africa, only 30% of girls go to primary school, and of them, only 2 to 3% finish secondary school. But now, there is a new secondary school in the region of Rumbek that is trying to change this. This is the Loreto Secondary School, which is open only to girls between the ages of 13 and 21, many of whom have been badly affected by war and poverty. The school is run by Sister Orla Tracy, a Loreto sister who is originally from Wicklow in Ireland, but first came to South Sudan in 2006.
South Sudan had just ended its last civil war with the North. They had just signed the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, and it was exciting. But it was very much ground zero when we arrived.
It's fascinating. Where other people might have seen danger and uncertainty, you saw potential.
When we came in 2006, there was one secondary school, and there were less than 10 girls in that secondary school. So when the sisters got the invitation and even came to visit, it was so clear that the mandate was something that really spoke to us and really moved us, because we're all about girl-child education. Our foundress 400 years ago had that great vision that women in time to come would do great things. And that's a very real experience for us here in South Sudan.
Like in many other African countries, traditionally, girls have not been seen as worthy of education and a career. Instead, they have been expected to marry a man in exchange for cows. The more cows a family has, the more well off they are.
Traditionally, she's considered almost like a commodity. When she marries, she brings cows into her family. Her brother needs cows to marry, her relatives need cows to marry. So to educate a girl traditionally within the culture, it wasn't very popular.
Following this order, you would get the correct.
Nailong Matiop is 20 years old and has been a student here for the last 4 years. And alongside her studies, she is also interning at the school, helping to educate the younger students, while giving her a sense of what it's like to be a working teacher.
You know, our great-grandparents, where there was no school, or if there is school, it's only for men. Because the girl, if you receive your periods the first time, even though you are 13, that makes you a woman already.
Oh, because that's when you would then get married and start to have children?
Yes.
And even in Nailong's own family, there are mixed feelings about her getting an education. What do your family think of you being here?
There are people who have different opinions about you, actually. My mama and my dad think of me as maybe someone who is bringing a change to the family. The uncles who want cows, they will think that this is a waste. As she grows old, she's reducing the number of cows.
As most families in South Sudan live in poverty, not having your daughter to marry off in exchange for cows is a financial blow to the family.
Mr. Wani, are these the scientists of South Sudan, the new scientists, young scientists of South Sudan?
But Sister Orla is trying to convince the parents that it's an investment in the future.
In South Sudan at the moment, over 52% of our 18-year-old girls are married. So we would have girls who are 16, 17, 18 here at the moment who potentially should be getting married. Now we're saying to the parents, allow them to finish secondary school, allow them to do internship with us and allow them to go to university. You're asking them to delay that income for another 8 years. That's a hard call to any parent. 8 years is a long time when you're used to dealing hand to mouth. How many of you want to study science in university?
This is something that many of the girls struggle with, being pulled in two directions, staying true to tradition and culture and family, and then the dream of working someday and having a career.
I want to study engineering.
Many other people want to study engineering. They're trying to walk two cultures. They're trying to walk their traditional culture and an educated culture, and they're trying to find an identity that can root them in both and where they can be a witness to the community as well.
So for me, I'm trying to be gynecologist so that I help those women.
Here there is an incredible enthusiasm for learning, a sense that these young women know they are the future of South Sudan.
The students here, particularly the secondary school students, are a revelation. They are really committed to education. They're really committed to finding a future for themselves.
Father Alan Neville is also from Ireland and a teacher here at the school.
Any girl who is here will have had to fight to get to secondary education.
In the beginning, we couldn't get girls to come to the school. Now we have 400 girls fighting for 100 places every year.
So I was the lucky one to be a man. And now if I've got that chance, I want to be helped with other girls also. I want to be their role model, to look up to me and say I want to be like her.
Are you saying that we win for this legislation?
What is your hope and dream for the future?
You know, in our country we need more of doctors, more of teachers, more of something like that, health facilities. So that is why in the future I hope to be a pharmacist.
We have the first group who graduated are now working. They're earning and they are now giving back to their families and they're now convincing other families it's worth the wait. When you get to sit in a job where you see transformation in front of your eyes every day and you see joy and hope, it's just a fantastic job.
These schools are important because they are making South Sudan realize that women too are to be considered in the community and can do much better and can also bring up this country.
In Rumbek, South Sudan, Colum Flynn for EWTN News In Depth.
We wish the students at the Loreto Secondary School a promising future. From Africa to Italy, when we come back.
The Pope Emeritus understood that it was important to portray this historical moment of his pontificate on canvas for history. He has chosen me, and it's a great responsibility for me.
behind the scenes with the Pope's official portrait painter, her newly unveiled work, her depiction of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI in retirement. Images of the week coming up.
After 4 years of hard work, a new painting of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is unveiled. The official portraitist of the popes explains the elements she included in her art and what they mean in our images of the week.
Stroke by stroke, artist Natalia Tsarkova captures former Pope Benedict surrounded by his pontifical family. She says their faces reflect their love for him. From Monsignor Georg Gainswein, his private secretary, to the 4 consecrated women dedicated to serving and accompanying the pontiff in his retirement.
Here in the foreground is Sister Carmela, looking lovingly and attentively at the Pope. And behind her is the cook. She holds the menu. There's Rosella in the back. She does the laundry and she does the cleaning. And the 4th one is Sister Christina. She tends and takes care of the church, the house chapel.
In addition to his pontifical family, a real family member, Benedict's brother, Monsignor Georg Ratzinger, who died in 2020. Tsarkova says light was the main theme of the painting because after Pope Benedict XVI resigned, instead of retreating into the shadows, he began a new mission, the mission of Pope Emeritus.
Tsarkova is originally from Moscow, where she practices a different religion. She's Orthodox. She says she too feels like a part of the pontifical family. And that does it for this week's edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We hope to see you next week, same time, for more stories important to your Catholic life. See you then.